Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about the holistic approach to sleep that I take and why it's important to move away from cookie cutter schedules, one size fits all approaches, and really look at sleep as an individual thing, really take a personalized approach. So, who am I to be talking about this? Firstly, if you don't know me, my name's Andrea Fallon. I'm a midwife, child health nurse, NDC practitioner, and holistic sleep coach. Most importantly, mum of two little girls. And yeah, I work with mums, responsive mums, who want to take a approach to sleep that feels right for them and feels right for their instincts and get more rest. And yeah, that's me. So let's dive straight in. I think firstly, I'd like to share that really I think it's important that we start moving away from this old approach to early parenting. And that's part of my mission, is to really change the narrative around parenting in the early years, and in particular, how we approach sleep. So before I dive into today's topic, I'd like to share a little bit about where we've come from, so that you understand why we need to move away from that approach and see where we need to go in this area. So, current advice around infant and toddler sleep is based on some of the early ideas of behavioral psychology. And so, in the first half of the 1900s, research was done on animals that showed that you could manipulate their behavior by offering either a reward or a punishment. And I think we're fairly familiar with this idea in parenting. You hear about reward charts, sticker charts, timeouts, those kind of things, still quite commonly practiced around the place. But these ideas kind of also formed the basis of how parenting babies was taught. And so it was believed that in responding to a baby's cry, we were rewarding that behavior, and that it was better to put them on a feeding schedule to build their resilience, and that would then help them to develop like a strong character if they were kind of, I guess, made to follow a schedule. The idea was that then we weren't spoiling them, that we were building this resilient little person. So 4-hourly feeding schedules were introduced. This was around about the 1950s. And so then Cry It Out was sort of given the okay by pediatricians at the time. And it was, like I said, this isn't actually based on anything that related to the science of sleep, the science of breastfeeding, the science of how babies' brains develop, and where child development goes, and the kind of stages that they go through. Rather, this kind of advice was based on these animal studies that showed very simplistic view of behavior. So it was like a behavioral approach. And unfortunately, this type of advice continued with the Ferber method and other approaches that really see sleep as a behavioral thing. So in this, when we're looking at sleep with this idea that it's behavioral, we're looking at the idea that it needs to be taught. It's a skill. You need to teach your baby to link their sleep cycles. You might have heard of that one. You need to teach them to self-settle. If you want to create good habits, and also if you ever want to see good sleep. These are the kind of messages that are out there. But these ideas don't take into account child development. Babies and even toddlers, they need us to be responsive because their brains can't self-soothe. So they may have very basic things like being able to suck on their fingers, I don't know, what else do babies do? Sometimes they wriggle around a lot to try and help regulate their nervous system. But actually, the reason why toddlers have tantrums is because that part of the brain that helps them to, think through things and calm themselves down and access different strategies to calm themselves down is so immature, doesn't even start to mature until the age of 3. So babies and toddlers just don't have the ability to be able to regulate themselves and build a strong character as these ideas that were floating around, in the 1950s. So what does does actually impact sleep then, and what should we be doing instead? Well, sleep is under the control of sleep regulators in the body. We've got the circadian clock and we've got sleep pressure. This is our natural sleep regulation system. And the circadian clock is what gets messed up when we're jet lagged. So if you've ever been jet lagged, you know that feeling. It's really horrible. You wake up in the middle of the night, you're wide awake, sleepy in the day. And that's that day-night pattern. That's that body clock that runs through the day-night pattern. Now, also, if you've ever been, I like to use this kind of analogy. If you've ever had a job where you've had to be up at the same time every day, you might find that you get to the point where you almost don't need the alarm clock. Like you'll wake up, bing, 6:33 every morning on the dot. Your body clock, your circadian rhythm is set. It's in a very good pattern when that's happening. And then you find on the weekends that it's happening as well. But that's the sign of a really healthy circadian clock. Now, the sleep pressure is what makes us feel sleepy at bedtime. Now, there's a whole lot of science behind these things, and I won't get too complicated, but basically, sleep pressure builds through the day, and little ones take naps just to take the edge off that sleep pressure. So when they get to bedtime, they should be nice and sleepy. And when we wake in the night, because we all wake in the night, we fall back to sleep nice and quickly when our sleep pressure is nice and high. So this is what actually controls the quality and the quantity of sleep, not whether our little one can self-settle, not whether they have bad habits, not whether they're on they haven't had a proper feed. These kind of ideas that are out there, they're based on that old approach. They're based on old ideas. They're not based on current research. So what I wanted to focus on today was really the holistic sleep system I use, but why it needs to be individual, why it needs to be something that is personalized to the individual. Now, firstly, we all have individual sleep needs, but with babies and toddlers, there's a massive variation in normal. So 10 hours to 16 hours in a 24-hour period is the normal range for 4 to 12-month-olds. That's huge. That's a huge normal range. And it's like a bell curve with most in the middle, but you've got your low sleep needs and your high sleep needs babies. Now, with adults, obviously the normal range is much smaller. It's like 7 to 9 hours is considered, that range. I mean, obviously if you sleep 10 hours, that's probably normal as well. But we're talking about quite a small range of normal compared to babies and toddlers. But the point is, sleep needs are so individual. They're genetically set, they're biologically set, and they're so individual. So we can't fit our babies and toddlers into a box. We can't say, okay, my baby's 6 months old, they should be getting 14 hours of sleep a day. If they're not getting that, I'm going to try and get it, because otherwise they're going to be overtired, their development's going to be affected. No. Sleep research does not support that idea at all. We can throw that one out well and truly. So sleep needs are individual. And these sleep regulators, if we're trying to fit our babies into some sort of schedule, they can get disrupted. And that's where we start to see problems with false starts, excessive night waking, early rising, nighttime parties, so awake at 2 a.m. for a couple of hours wanting to play. Those problems generally arise when we've got a bit of a disruption to these natural sleep regulators. So yes, there can be medical reasons. Yes, for young babies, there can be feeding issues going on. But by and large, most of the time, we're seeing some disruption to these sleep regulators. And again, it's not about whether the baby can self-settle. It's not about whether they can, whether they're upset because you put them down somewhere different to where they fell asleep. Like, none of that is what is really controlling the quality and the quantity of the sleep. So sleep needs are individual. Second thing that's individual, feeding needs. So babies actually have a fairly large variation, again, in the normal amount of milk that they will take. So a breastfed baby, obviously an exclusively breastfed baby, we don't know how much they're getting. We go by their wet nappies, their weight gain, and whether they just seem happy and satisfied. But there is quite a variation in the normal volume of milk that a breastfed baby will take during the day. So we have to be aware of that and know that our little one has their own feeding needs. Now, formula-fed babies actually will take quite a variation as well, maybe a little less of a variation in normal, but there is still variation in how much milk formula-fed baby will take. But the idea is that we actually need to sort of tune in and follow how much they seem to need. What I see time and time again is sleep consultants who don't have any sort of training in feeding for babies, telling people to try and push out the feeds, feed them less often. The feeding is the issue. They're waking to feed and it's a habit. No, that's quite dangerous advice, especially in babies under 6 months of age, because if they're a little one that needs more, if mum's milk storage capacity, so how much milk she can hold at a particular time, is smaller, and because of that, the baby needs to feed more often. If you start pushing out the feeds, you really risk dropping the milk supply, having a baby losing weight, or a baby that's just upset because they're hungry. So we don't want to play around too much with, schedules, feeding schedules, this idea that we have to push out the feeds. We need to really be looking at our baby as an individual and how many feeds or how often they feed that's normal for them. So the second thing that's individual that almost no one talks about in the sleep world is sensory profile. Now, you might have heard very general advice like, don't overstimulate your baby, or, take your baby on these sensory adventures and give them lots and lots of sensory. Now, the problem with that is it's not nuanced at all to what our babies need as individuals. We're all born with a sensory profile, which means that some things wind us up and make us a bit upset, and other things calm us down in terms of our senses. So we're all pretty familiar with, sight, taste, touch, sound, smell. There's other senses as well. There's movement, there's deep pressure. So we have, and there's the feelings inside our body, like the feeling that we're thirsty, the feeling that we need to use the toilet, that kind of thing. So that we've got these senses, and some things will dial our babies up or make them upset, and some things will calm our babies down. And so we need to kind of tune into what our baby's sensory profile is and what they're trying to tell us if we want to see the best sleep that we can. Because if we're accidentally giving them a lot of what's too much for them, they're going to be difficult to settle. And if we're accidentally not giving them enough of what they're looking for, they may wake during the night looking to fill this sensory cup, looking for this kind of experience. So we need to be familiar with what our baby's sensory profile is. The next thing we need to look at is this baby's temperament traits. So again, we're all born with temperament traits. What makes us us. And so tuning into what our baby's temperament traits are means that we can respond to them in a way that suits their needs. And this is really important. So this is the idea of attunement. This is the idea that we tune into our baby. And when we're tuning into our baby, we meet their needs as best as we can, and it's only as best as we can. No one gets it right all the time. That is what builds a secure attachment with our baby, and that's what sets them up for resilience as a baby, as a child, and into adulthood. Attachment is so important. So having that secure attachment, because we're tuning into them as a person and parenting them as what they need, and not following some sort of rigid set rules and schedules, because that might not be what they need, and that's going to cause a disconnection between you and your baby, and we don't want that. We need connection, because connection means relaxed bub, relaxed mum, and then sleep can happen. If we've got stress going on, sleep can't happen. That messes up with that natural sleep regulation system I was talking about. So if you've got someone who's telling you to follow this schedule, your baby needs to sleep at this time, wake windows must be this many hours, The problem with that is that if your baby is more of a kind of go with the flow temperament, and they're also maybe a baby that needs a lot more support from you, if you're implementing this plan with a schedule and then you're trying to pat and shush them in a cot, they're going to get really upset. It really goes against like how they are, and it's not a fit, and that's going to cause this disconnection. So we need to be very mindful of this. And finally, in this kind of holistic approach that I take, and what we need to look at, we still need to look at your individual needs too as a mum, because it's all well and good to talk about babies' needs, but you have needs too, and they're also important. So we need to look at how can we make your sleeping arrangements good so it suits your family? How can we prioritize your own rest and your own emotional care? Because if you're getting upset and anxious and stressed, that's going to have an impact on your baby, and then sleep's not going to happen. So we want to look at your needs and baby's needs and put those two together and find the best fit possible and find the best way forward to make days manageable, nights manageable, and just get everyone rested and connected and happy. And that's really how I work with my clients. That's the approach that I take. It's based on science, it's based on research, and it's looking at everything to make sure everyone's needs are met as best as we possibly can. So if you're hearing about these strict schedules, no, it's not based on any science or research. If you're hearing about this one size fits all, or if anyone's telling you you should do this, you should do that, well, I'd be very cautious of those rules, because a personalized, individualized plan is what is needed time and time again. No one's the same. We're all unique. So I hope you found that helpful. I'd love to hear more about your situation. If you're looking for some support, then send me a message on Facebook, send me an email. You can book a call via my website. We can have a chat. I'd love to know more about your situation and how I can support you. See ya.